Well, hi, everyone, and good evening to you here from Finland. Just want to say that I will be traveling tomorrow, but Tuija and I hope, since we're on the evening schedule, that we will be able to do the Soul of Nations by 8 o'clock our time, 5 p.m. GMT. So we'll do our very best to be there, and if we can't be, we'll try to communicate with someone who can notify you that we just didn't make it. But I think it'll be okay. That's my hope. Just want to. This is the sort of the glamour work we've been doing now for quite a while. I think 122 programs, and Olivia, Tuija, and I kind of got this going, as some of you have done in your own glamour work. You have small groups that are working on these things, and that's all to the good. And we hope to persist. Tonight we'll be meditating. It's a glamour that he actually names. He calls it the glamour of depression. It's kind of a graying out of a lot of possibilities, and of course depression is lying beneath a lot of the egotistical bombast that we see in the dictators of the world and the enemies of democracy. The people that want to be at the center is oftentimes a compensation for the general low level of expectation, or for the dissatisfaction they have regarding their own lives. So it's a little bit of a change. We've been working on first ray glamours, and of course we'll be working on the first ray today, but this is a little change to something that covers many of the rays, and maybe the soft line particularly. Even the first ray is not immune from it. Let's just have a little alignment here. And in the silence, we might say, find each other as soul-infused personalities, and even as units of consciousness, the soul. And it's going to be our work to come together as a group unit, and using our beam of projected will-strengthened light, discover this glamour where it does exist, and to penetrate it, weaken it, dissipate it, DK talks a lot about the joy of the soul, and he also talks about how hard it is at times like this of transition really to see ahead, and how it is that great energies coming in, higher energies than usual, can cause all kinds of reactions, glamorous reactions in the personality. So, before getting into our reading, I just want to welcome you, and Alexandra, Annette, Antoinette, Barbara, Catherine, Deborah, Frida, Helen, and Jo is, maybe she's on both sides at the same time, I'm not sure. Lots of Gemini. Okay. Joan and Yoka, Karen and Catherine, Kim, Laura, Margot, Mariana, Martha, Natnia, Nyanka, Stacia, Suzanne, Tia, Tu, and Zenaidi. And over here on the staff side, we're being assisted by BL and Joe and Michael. And Tuija's over there on that side as well. And just in case there's any little emergency, it sometimes happens, especially when they start. Joe and I were talking about the upgrading of programs. It takes a while before they get the bugs out of an upgraded program. Now, we ended last time with just on the brink of going into the glamours per se. And he's talking about the powerful illusions that are coming in. We can't handle a lot of these energies yet, and so we misunderstand what they're really meant to do. The forces of Aquarius, into which the sun is passing now, it's in that transition phase. Certainly, it's like 2.5 days in the normal daily zodiac, and we have 25 days possibly, and 250, and even for very large cycles, 2,500, on either side of the change point. And those are mixed energies. So let's say when you're in the end of Pisces, you feel a little bit of Aquarius coming up in this retrogression or precession of the equinoxes. And when you're into Aquarius, maybe there's a little remainder of the Piscean energy until one is quite free of it. Of course, one is never free of zodiacal energies. They're all part of the head center in this great being in whom we live and move and have our being. So we're not going to really be finished with them. It's just they will not be as strong, and they will be almost entirely overtaken by the sign of the period. So he says, therefore, powerful and new energies are playing upon humanity, producing effects in all the three bodies. Think about that, We've all been Pisceanly conditioned. How many incarnations have we had in the last 2,000 or so years? And now the new energies are coming in, and they do have an effect right in the bodies of the personality. And when it happens to be Aquarius, along with Gemini, there are a lot of etheric changes that we would look for. With Pisces, it would be more the emotional, but Aquarius is mental, etheric, more so. And these new energies, they are evoking glamours in the emotional nature and illusions in the mental nature. Those easily subject to glamour become at this time conscious of an emphasized duality. That's always a sign of progress, when the duality is clear and a choice has to be made, as it was in the case of Arjuna. And we're all of us, somehow in this battle of Kurukshetra, the symbolic battle when it comes to our progress on the path of discipleship. The subject, as you will therefore see, is vast. And this is important, and this science of the psychological influences and the results of their impact upon the human mechanism is as yet in its infancy. So we take the science of the rays, the science of esoteric astrology, the science of the centers of force, wrap it all up into the new esoteric psychology, the fifth force I like to call it. It's the science of the psychological influences and the results of their impact upon the human mechanism. And this is how we, as the newer type of psychologist and dealing with esoteric energies, attempt to approach the understanding of the human being. Of course, it will be said that we have no basis for what we're doing, and there's no real scientific foundation, and yet later the more conventional approaches will arrive at the approaches that have been given in advance by the masters and in which we are being trained. He says, going on, that I have, however, indicated enough to arouse interest and to start investigation in this new field of psychological activity. And, our work with the University of the Seven Rays has been very psychological, and we've really tried to develop ourselves and through our associates as much of the new science of esoteric astrology as we may safely develop with some confidence in its reliability. More is coming. And with such instruments as the personal identity profile, the PIP 3 now, that Walter and others have helped us complete. That test gives some quantifiable basis for the presence of certain energies within your nature. So by all means, do write to Walter if you do not have his, well, we've got to get you his email address if you don't have it, and he'll send you the way to get the PIP, and you can have it on your computer. It's free of charge. We always, appreciate the donations to keep things going, obviously. But in general, you can have it there, and you'll get a readout and of graphs and so forth on your computer, and you're free to spread it around. We're trying that method, to spread around the PIP so that more and more people can be aware of this quantifiable approach to the rays. It's still in its infancy, and that so-called, what he calls expert diagnosis that we'll be able to apply to the rays, excuse me, is not yet with us. But I have a feeling that all kinds of aspects of the eye and different physiological hints will be there. And I think that as well we'll have certain psychological tendencies which will be easily discerned, and the ray will be known. Now, one day, of course, like the Tibetan, we will just see it. He'll open his inner apparatus and he'll see the way the rays are playing and their color and their sources and so forth. And that day will come for us when we have training from the Master. Now, we're just on the borderland here, and here we are. To return to the consideration of the many glamours which are produced by and related to certain ray types, here we go. Now, if the first ray is in your ray chart, you probably will demonstrate this. Some of these glamours, maybe, you'll know which ones might be more glamorous than others or more problematic to you than others, and certainly people that associate with you will have reminded you of certain tendencies that you have along your ray line, which are not necessarily helpful to them or to your understanding or to your apprehension of reality oftentimes, the people who can view us from relatively close at hand will impart to us something we might not see ourselves. Now, usually it might be the soul, it might be the personality, even the mind, somehow. Okay, and BL has helped us here about how to get to the PIP, and I think it's in the chat box, is my guess. But if you've had a very, very strong series of, let's say, Ray 1 personalities in some of your incarnations, there may be a kind of forward momentum, and it may still carry into this life, so that all that you demonstrate may not be coming from this life particularly. It's interesting, there was a man who was kind of the astrologer for the early Alice Bailey group that worked at headquarters. And, astrology is upon the third ray, and his rays in this incarnation were the second, the sixth, the first and the first, and the seventh. 2, 6, 1, 1, 7. I give them an order from the soul and on down. Okay. So, but why astrology? And it turned out that he had a very powerful Ray 3 in his previous life, and as we know, the third ray is quite particularly the astrologer's ray. Master DK has presented us with an astrology coming out of the second ray, but he is well endowed with the third ray as well, so it's kind of a mixture of the third and second ray. So from the past can come these tendencies, which may be simply helpful or supportive, or maybe contain some kind of wrong tendency or some kind of glamour, and you wonder how you had it. And then further, if you look closely at how DK analyzes the nations in the book The Destiny of the Nations, you'll see that it's a very complete analysis, and the rays, the signs and the rays coming through the signs are considered of real importance. So the whether or not a particular ray is in your ray chart, if it's very prominently reinforced by other astrological, planetary, and sign factors, then you will, demonstrate that ray on some level, and maybe some glamours will be carried along with it. I noticed this in my own case, having the sun in Aries and Leo very close to the ascendant with Pluto, first ray planet. And as DK says, no matter what else Aries does, it will strengthen the will. So it's a preeminent first ray sign, and naturally one brings a certain amount of first ray into the situation, and maybe some of the liabilities of that. So you'll have to examine your horoscope to see from where else the glamours might be coming in, or where else the rays might be coming in. With Leo, it's a first ray, fifth ray sign, and a number of people, for 20, 25 years, had the first ray planet Pluto in Leo. It's a real reinforcement of the first ray. So the question is it demonstrating for good or for ill, or in any personal way? And it takes a clear analysis to see the sources here. Now, as we go through these, think about yourself and whether any of these apply to you. Maybe we'll take a little, you can confess to the glamour. I know that, I'm not exactly a first-rate type in this life, but when I've been directing operas and plays and rituals, some old first-rate thing comes back, and I get pretty bossy, So telling people where to go and what to do, and liking the idea that they listen to me, if they do. So I can kind of see a problem there, but it's coming in via Aries and Leo, and it's not coming in via the ray chart. So I kind of admit to that, and I see myself fall into a pattern. And the pattern is maybe an old one, associated with the dramatic arts for many centuries, even back in Greece and all that. So, you have to see where things might come from. The glamour of physical strength, well, it's good to be strong, but one can make an egotistical case out of one's physical strength and pride oneself, which is always a danger for the first ray, upon one's physical strength. I'm not saying that all weightlifters have this, but there are some people of monumental stature, the giantism and so forth, and they have obvious physiques of a splendid kind and even overdone, and they walk around with that as if calling attention to themselves, and they become the center of their own psyche through the demonstration of their physical strength. See, whenever you have the personality emphasized rather than the soul and the others and the unity and so forth, you're ripe for some type of glamour to work through you. So, we've kept our eyes open. We've seen these kinds of people. The glamour of personal magnetism, well, the one at the center who is so strong, so magnetic, so attractive, so powerful, that naturally people are going to gravitate to this person, and again, the person will be very pleased about that and will exercise that, and they get stuck in the glamour of the lower ego. I mean, so many of these things, these glamours for the first ray, are about standing in the center, taking up too much space within your own field of consciousness, having your eyes more upon your personal self than upon any kind of larger picture which involves cooperation and unity and a de-emphasis of your own self-importance, but, instead emphasizing your own self-importance and power and commanding nature and so forth. The glamour of self-centeredness and personal potency that goes along, doesn't it, with what we've been talking. The eyes are really on the self, and one is seen as the commanding center and to be admired, really, because people think, that they are worthy of the admiration. We have some specific cases in the political arena right now where people are standing very much in the center of their own consciousness. They have a strong degree of narcissism. They don't consult with others. They think always that their own idea is best, and they make terrible mistakes based upon a limited point of view, and that point of view being their own nature, their own potency, and their preference for considering themselves as the most important factor in their field of consciousness. I remember just recently there was a commentator who repeated to one of our politicians, this is not about you. This politician, and you know who I mean, had gone to the cities where these massacres had taken place and somehow managed in it all to emphasize himself and not the compassion that was due. So the commentator said, this is not about you. This is not about you. finally, this is not about you. So, there's a deep-seated insecurity to give away some kind of power to others, some kind of significance to others. And so, one keeps on re-emphasizing the self, the little self. Master DK, in his psychology book, dealt with the psychopathologies of the various ray types. And with ray 1 and ray 5, he said that such an isolation can occur that the individual becomes virtually untouchable. They are so walled off in their sense of self. And other problems exist with the 2-4-6 line and the 3-7 line and so forth. We'll get to that. So you can pretty much see that we're talking about the same thing here. The glamour of the one at the center who can, really handle all things. that one at the center, okay, can direct, and always has to be referred to and always has to be asked, and the will of others is always subject to the one who is at the center. That's one of the big problems. We'll come to it. There is the de-emphasis of the will of others and the overemphasis upon one's own will. And the result of all that is that the divine will does not get expressed, because the divine will comes in many little packages, in many people. And altogether, the presentation is the divine will, not just in one person. Well, the glamour of selfish personal ambition. A Master Hilarion says, be not ambitious, but work as one who is ambitious. Well, he manages somehow to create, not to take away that power, that central power that ambition can give, but to apply it in the right way. Now, when you think, that you're the center of the world and you can do anything better than anybody else, you may fall victim to wanting to ascend all by yourself. But you know how it was. DK showed the door of initiation, and it was too narrow for the ambitious person to get through. But when he took the hands of others, and they took the hands of others, and it was a group, then suddenly the door became passable. So what is not passable in one's selfish self becomes passable when the spirit of cooperation and love and group join together, and that's something in the integration formula which the first ray really has to learn. I'll try to find that because it's just some beautiful stuff from the old commentary. Okay, well, maybe I've said enough there with those 5, and then we'll take the other. Is there anybody who can respond to thinking that one of these may be appropriate, or that maybe you've stamped it out or understood it, or it's been an issue for you at some point in your life? It doesn't have to carry through the whole life. We do have stages, I think, that I would absolutely, if I was to, confess to this, I really was into the glamour of physical strength. I know, being a bit of a wreck at the moment, I don't look like that, but when I was a kid and up to a certain age, physical strength was everything. And, and everything that would provide it, and every kind of exercise mechanism that would make it obvious. And I always compared myself to others in terms of how strong or how tough a person was. And I always strove, maybe in an ambitious manner, to be physically stronger and stronger. And some of my best friends were among the strongest physically in the schools. And I just kind of recognize it now from a distance. I mean, who can run the fastest? Who can throw the ball the farthest? Who can lift the most? Who can jump the highest? It's all of those things that I used to really attend to until maybe I outgrew it. Maybe I outgrew it. Okay, is there anybody who feels you can speak to any of these things?
Kim has written, yes, I can relate to self-centeredness, isolation, aloneness. Glad to say things are starting to change.
Right. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
continues, so if we recognize these glamours, it means we may have this ray type question.
That's the idea. Another type of self-centeredness comes in on Ray 4. And in general, self-centeredness is a general problem of the personality. But self-centeredness and really happy to be self-centered and really proud to be the one at the center, that's quite a Ray 1 thing. I wouldn't necessarily, what I would do is make a list with all of the reasons that point to a particular ray. If you read my book, A Tapestry of the Gods, about the rays, I have a lot of those lists, and you kind of go down and you kind of check off the points which are associated with the rays, and not all of them are positive, of course, if you're looking for glamours, but you can check off the positive, check off the negative, and just see quantitatively how the numbers show up, well, really, every personality at a certain stage is self-centered, but the question is, how long does it persist? And, when you think about the Christ, it's said of him, he is a man for others, And sometimes we, Tuija and I, we go up in this far northern city in Norway, and there's this convent, and I think it's called Totus Tuus, all for you. I think that's what it means in Latin, entirely for you. And when we start giving away our self-centeredness and actually care about other people, as we inevitably do as the soul begins to unfold, this particular glamour begins to fade. Now, if it has a real tough time fading, it might be the first ray. The first ray, I can handle it. You don't need to tell me. I can do it myself. And I must say that, being an Aries type as I am, there's a lot in Aries, so I can do it myself. Don't bother me with the facts. Don't tell me how to do it. I can do it myself. And, you can get into a lot of difficulty if you're wrong and don't take good advice. So yes, in answer to your question, it points towards a ray, and yet must not be the only thing by which we judge judge the presence of ray in our nature. You have to explore carefully, because not everything is just the ray chart. Like I said, the astrological chart will assist us in this because it provides certain rays, and also our level of evolution. Now, here's what I want to say. When you're taking the first initiation, the seventh ray becomes really important. So just that period through which you are passing around the first initiation, the seventh ray will be part of a strong part of how you do things. And, going on, the sixth ray when you're taking the second initiation, and the fifth ray when you're taking the third initiation. So it pretty well goes like this. It goes 7, 6, 5, 4, 1. First ray is applied to the mastership, but the fourth ray, maybe in its most agonizing way, to the fourth initiation. So those are three ways that the rays can influence by themselves in the ray chart, through astrology and through the period of possibly initiatory life through which you are passing. Like he said, rays 6 and 4 rules the path of aspiration. 3 and 5 rules the path of discipleship. 1 and 7 rule the path of initiation. And ray 2 kind of pervades the whole thing. Okay, let's go on a little bit here. Are there other rays which deal with the glamour of isolation and aloneness? Well, yeah, I would say ray 4. No. Isolation and aloneness, ray 5. That's discussed in that way. Now, of course, here's another factor. Some incarnations are extroverted. Some incarnations are introverted. In general, the extroverted phase is an earlier one, but you can have introverted incarnations during the extroverted phase. And the introverted phase is a later one. You begin to look within for reality. And yet you can have extroverted mini phases during that that later introverted stage. So yes, ray 5 is another one. You know, a lot of ray 5 people, they find themselves socially awkward. They can only talk shop, you know. Communicating can be difficult. There's not enough astral body responsiveness. As a matter of fact, some of them have come from other planets, we're told, in order just to build in the second pedal to the astral responsiveness, because on their planet of origin, they didn't really have it, or at least it couldn't be built in there. A planet like Vulcan, for instance, you know, maybe during the fifth root race, certain Vulcanians came in, you know, working in the scientific field to build in the later the second ray into their system. And Mercury too is quite a mental planet, and some Mercurians, you know, the causal body was developed on Mercury, may come to this planet for additional work along the astral sensitive line. So I think, you know, and remember, Suzanne, we go through phases of phases when there are certain transits, there are certain directions, there are certain progressions under certain planets which encourage isolation or aloneness. I mean, if you're going through a Saturnian period, you may be on your own. If you're going through a Plutonian period, same thing, you're thrown back on yourself. If you're going through a Jupiter or a Venus period, you get a lot of help from your friends, you know. It's much more affiliative. So you have to check out these impermanent passages of planets that make you think that that might be your ray, but it's just a ray period through which you are passing for a certain duration that the transit, the progression, or the direction lasts. Okay, now, from Tia, I've suffered from the glamour of personal magnetism.
Rita's hand has been raised.
Who? I'm sorry? I have Tia here.
I'm sorry. Rita's hand has been raised.
Okay, well, we'll get to... Okay, before I launch off on that, so yes, yeah, right, Frida, what is your thought? You're self-muted. There we go. Okay, you're good.
Hello, can you hear me?
You bet, you bet.
Okay, that's great. Well, I was looking at the last one, the glamour of superimposed will upon others and upon groups. And I would describe that as perhaps dominance over others.
Yes.
And certainly it's a quality of many governments. And maybe it's one we can work on today, I don't know. I would say how it manifests for me personally is bossiness.
Yeah.
So I often hear from my siblings, from my husband, that I'm bossy. So I'm going to own that as being this glamour of dominance over others. So there you go.
Yeah, and it can be also, you know, we might say that that has to be the solar personality, but a first-ray mind can also give it. And as I was explaining earlier in the program, inheritance from a previous incarnation can give it, and astrological factors along this line can give it, whether or not it's in your ray chart specifically. So, yeah, but actually we're going to, if we're not sufficiently depressed after reading all this, maybe we will be, and we'll meditate on the glamour of depression today. That's our plan so far.
Okay.
Okay, Frida, thank you. I've suffered, says Tia, from the glamour of personal magnetism and the glamour of isolation, of aloneness, of aloofness. Okay, well, some of those are Ray 1 things, and some, if there's a longing to be magnetic, then we're getting more into something that a lot of us who have the second ray, and we're educators, and we're working with people who need assistance in a psychological way. It's the love of being loved, the love of being loved. And personal magnetism enters there in a different way, or, the glamour of popularity, the glamour of wanting to be looked at with love and so forth. A lot of first-rate types come along and say, I don't care if you love me, just as long as you respect me. This is typical first-rate stuff. But to have, the psychologist Carl Rogers sent this towards his clients. It's called unconditional positive regard. And that sounds like fancy words, but basically it meant no matter what you've done, no matter who you are, I look upon you with positivity. Now, he was so second rate. There is an old film called Gloria. And Gloria was a kind of a psychological client, and she had filmed interviews with Carl Rogers, with Fritz Perls, and with, what's the name of the fifth ray guy? I can't, well, anyway, he was a founder of cognitive therapy, and it relied upon a lot of common sense, and the name is escaping me right now. But anyway, Fritz Perls, first ray, Carl Rogers, second ray, and this other man, well established in his field, so I certainly should be remembering, fifth ray. And, she had the same problem, whatever it was, and they all approached it in their own different way. And then she was asked about her impressions and so forth, and she says she got the most out of the first ray approach. Now, Fritz Perls was the guy who founded, I'm going to forget that too. It's Gestalt therapy, at least his own version of it, and he was relentless. He just wouldn't let you get away with a thing. Using the first ray, very incisive, very plutonic, and she felt that she got the most from that. So it just depends. I'm remembering one of DK's students, RSU, and she had a Ray 1 astral body. That's unusual. Maybe a few of them had Ray 1 astral bodies in transition to something else. And DK commented on her lonely and suffering astral body. But the loneliness was part of it. And then elsewhere he talks about the Ray 1 astral body. It doesn't mean just because you feel lonely you have one of those, because they're also subject to explosions and great demonstrations of emotion at other times, and that are extremely non-responsive to others and non-interactive and held back and emotionally suppressive for some types. So interestingly, you say, when I thought I had passed out of these successfully, I commenced, a long Scorpio transit just to make sure that I was clear on this, and you're still at work in progress. Okay, that is a good test. And there are probably ray cycles that operate on their own numbers. Now, DK hasn't really dealt with them, but we could probably figure out what some of those are and test them out. But there are certainly cycles that operate astrologically which are easier to see. And, when you've got Pluto and Mars as rulers in a long Scorpio cycle, and you're dealing with, the serpent and the serpent handler Ophiuchus, and you're dealing with Hercules and so forth, you definitely have a challenge. And the question is, what has been overcome? And the Scorpio period is a good time to figure out what has been overcome. I've got the Scorpio moon now for 2.5 years. I've had it for a while. And it is testing. There's no question about it. So anyway, you identify this, okay? And some of it is from the first ray, and some of it may come in on a certain second ray line. It depends on how this personal magnetism is actually working, and what induces the isolation, and whether the isolation is useful or whether it gets in the way of perceiving something more real or perceiving group consciousness. We have to look at what happens as a result of isolation, aloneness, aloofness. Positive, not positive, takes a lot of analysis. But thank you for sharing this, and particularly good for everybody to note is that when you go through a transit, a progression of some, energies that may not be operative prominently may come in for a while, and you'll have to deal with them. Okay. Thank you, Tia. Would many retrogrades in a chart influence this? Well, it might incline towards the introversion aspect. And when a planet goes direct, it generally becomes more, not only symbolically, but actually extroverted. You know how it is, the retrogradation means go back over this and clarify it and straighten it out. So it can be useful. But in general, if you're born with 4 or 5 retrograde planets, there may be something that's really pulling within and for internal consideration. And that may not be a bad thing at all, maybe just what's needed, rather than the outgoing nature. I remember when I met long ago, my coworker Keith Bailey and I, we met the last living disciple in the Tibetans group. And we went up to her apartment, and it was in the early 1980s, and she didn't live so much longer, really. But anyway, we met her, and I heard that she described me as a very outgoing type. And that was my first impression upon her, because, probably in those days she had association with a lot of introverted people. So, it's always hard to tell how people see you and what you really are and so forth. But it gave me a little bit of a pause. And I said, okay, well, I wonder, what is that showing me? And then I looked for causes and so forth, along with the introversion, So it's a big study, this psychology of your own energy system and where you fit and what you're cultivating and what you are subject to that may not be all that helpful, the glamours, the illusions, and we try to be as honest as possible about it, so we don't have to hide and pretend or, do any of those things that just aren't helpful at all. We pretend to be this, we pretend to be that. It's just, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So it's better to be very clear and very honest. At least, we may not be correct, but at least we're trying to be honest about it. Okay, so let's see. Isolation, the factor. In the past, I've experienced much depression in my life, so looking forward to any esoteric insights in this. Well, right. And I'm sure, look, there are certain phases in the path. Well, maybe the big dark night of the soul is going to occur upon the cross, whatever that means symbolically. DK said Jesus, the initiate Jesus, suffered a very powerful dark night of the soul when he was on the cross, because he visualized or more than visualized, he felt and saw all the pain of humanity, and somehow he was overwhelmed by that. But there's an earlier thing that has to do with the second initiation, and a period in there where a lot of DK students either looking forward to the second degree or having taken it. And that is, as he says, there are many recriminations at that period. In other words, the sense of not having done well enough, and then accusing yourself of that, and that can be a source of depression. Alice Bailey said she was really subject to it. She said, I just can't help but be affected by this feeling of failure, she said, that in the past I've really let the masters down and so forth. So there's a recrimination coming from who knows where. But those kinds of recriminations, as you try to straighten out what you do, make sure it's really right in terms of the divine plan, okay, that can contribute to depression. And also the hill and valley experience of the mystics that we have been. And there'll be a lot more of that in the age of Aquarius, because he talks about that kind of sine wave symbol as also depicting the sunny top of the mountain, and then the depression and low energy and self-accusation, all that in the valley, and then rise again and rise again. So, you know, and if you take that far enough, you get the manic depressive state. And if I was an Aquarian with a fourth ray something really powerful, I'd really watch out for the manic depressive tendencies. But to a certain extent, it's with all of us as we strive, and as the personality doesn't quite respond, or the personality holds it for a while and then lets go, and we're right back to where we were. So, you know, the personality can't take it all and has to revert to what it is, and then we plunge down into the valley and so forth. So that's why I say it's such a general problem, this sense of the fear of failure, you know, and not having done enough, and not having done it well, and what will my co-disciples think? What will my master think? You know, it has to be lived through. Everybody has to live through it. Okay, everybody. So we'll maybe get into that, and like the last time, actually, Frida, we actually did that thing about dominance. That was, or just recently, we did a meditation on dominance and the need to dominate. Sometimes it's just a compensation for a deeply felt insecurity. So, okay, I'm not sure about Aaron T. Beck. I don't know who that is.
That was in response to your trying to recall one of the psychologists or psychiatrists.
Ah.
No,
it wasn't.
Yeah, and the type of,
yeah.
The type of,
Albert Ellis. That's it. Albert Ellis was the fifth ray guy. Boy, was he fifth ray, and he really wanted people to make sense. And when they were entertaining thoughts that were just really illusory, he penetrated that, okay? So it was indeed Albert Ellis, at least in this this particular movie, Gloria. Now, there may have been others. I don't know. I've had that kind of education. But, you know, when you get into DK's psychology, you just realize the distance in subtlety and true causation, which modern psychology has yet to travel. I mean, it's doing a lot of good, especially in psychologically oriented countries like the United States, or wherever there's a strong second ray or fourth ray. But, okay. And I think someone here, Kim, has got it. Two of the earliest forms of cognitive behavioral therapy were rational emotive behavioral therapy. Yeah, Albert Ellis, I guess that's it. Okay, I didn't see your diagram here, your statement, but okay. That's it. In the 1950s, in cognitive therapy by Aaron T. Beck. Okay, good. Good. So that's nailing that down a little bit. And of course, he was so fifth ray. It was really interesting. You might want to, I don't know if this kind of film or it's been made into a video, and maybe it's found on the internet. Who knows? And I think it's really worth the watch because you see how she responds to these different people. And even the name Gloria is interesting because it suggests that here's a soul really wanting to shine and get over her obstructions, and how the different people would help her. Well, obviously, DK would help her in a still different way if she was up to it, and it would be through certain types of subtle meditation and eventually awareness of the rays, and it would be another thing all together. And the transcendental psychologist of the fourth force would help her in still another way, So the basic thing is we have to help people, and people come to us all the time, one way or another, and we have to be resourceful enough to sort of know what they need. Not entirely, but, to a degree, and then use it. Okay. So let's see if we can do that. Yeah, Michael.
Yes, perhaps you'd like to comment a little bit on the wide range that these distortions of reality may express, i.e. from very out there to extraordinarily subtle.
Well, Master DK helps us just a little there, but more or less reinforcing the question. He says the names of glamour are legion. Now, legion always means a huge number. So, when you have a lot of demons and all that, their number is legion. And it is the amazingly individual path that each individual has taken in the combination of astrology and rays that he or she has experienced over many, many millions of years. This is what contributes to the diversity of the glamours, even though they may be along a certain ray line. Also, it has to do with what particular rays are in power at the moment, because a lot of people will be affected accordingly. Like during the Piscean Age and certain parts of it, especially the sixth ray was a huge thing. And so many people were affected, whatever their rays might have been, by the sixth ray and its possible glamours. So the variety is legion and has to do with our individual paths of development. And when DK says, I'm giving you some glamours, he says, I'm not giving you by any means the great variety of glamours that might exist. And, sometimes when he analyzes a particular person, he goes into great detail about what their particular glamour might be. And it's at variation with the simple statement, oh, you have the typical first ray, second ray, third ray glamours. There's some kind of subtle combination of things. And of course, we need the master's type of discernment to see in that way. I don't think that we should expect of ourselves that we're going to see in that way. What I'd like to do, because we've got to get through one at least, is take a look at a little bit more. Oh, I'm remembering something. Oh, a very ugly image. It's from the Three Penny Opera, which was Kurt Weill and coming out of the Germany before the Nazis, and it's all about ambition and stepping on other people, climbing to try to get to the top, and actually stepping on the face of the other person, and running, he steps on your face. This is the really downside of selfish personal ambition. It has such a disregard for other people, and really interferes with their progress up the mountain, and you'll use anything to advance your cause. And we know there are selfish people like this, and when the first ray is prominent, it also gives you the power to do that. The glamour of rulership, of dictatorship, or of wide control. Well, there's a lot of people emerging today that just don't want democracy. They think so much of themselves and that they know all the answers, and they glorify themselves. It's sort of like the, I don't know, what would I call it? The emperor glamour, you know? There's a lot of Roman emperors running around today, and they haven't gotten over it yet. So, you know, they think that everything wonderful is separated in them, is concentrated in them, even though to a great extent it was just madness. You know, they were just insane. They were out of their minds. So, but they certainly wanted to become a god or considered themselves a god. And so, you know, although dictatorship today is a little toned down, it does come from that sort of emperor complex, which itself is a de-emphasis of the importance of the will of others, the desire of others, and emphasis selfishly only on your own will and desire as being the very best. Now, this one's interesting, the next one, the glamour of the Messiah complex in the field of politics. Well, there is one in the field of religion, too. It has more to do with the second and the sixth ray. You know, the Savior has arrived, listen to him. He has all the answers. We follow the leader, you know. Is it Mussolini? Is it Hitler? Hitler was really a big one. People felt, Hitler has arrived, and now all of our problems will be solved. He is our political savior. Now, you know, excuse me, every once in a while that happens. The big problem there, of course, is there's lots of good ideas in the world, and we arrive at sometimes the best way by considering the combination of many of the ideas and not just something coming from a fallible human being. And we see this today. I am the greatest and you don't count. And listen to me and all will be well in the field of politics. Do as I say, and certainly not as I do. Do as I say. Okay, so the glamour of the Messiah complex in the field of politics, the glamour of selfish destiny. So this is something coming in from the metaphysical area of the divine right of kings, not impersonally, but personally exacted, meaning since I am the divine king, you must do exactly what I say. You know, and I demand it because I am the designated king of the divine forces. Now, maybe I am that just through physical heredity. That's usually the way it has been. Or I am that because of my prowess on the battlefield. I conquered everything, and I've proven that I'm the best. And now you will have to obey everything I say, and God backs it up, or some divine power. In other words, the king itself is sanctioned by God, by the divine powers. And not only if you turn against the king, you turn against God. Well, that's a pretty strong argument to keep down the people who would like to reform the situation, because how do you reform God? God decreed it, you know. The glamour of destruction. Oh, isn't it great to get in there and just tear the place apart? And there's a certain exaltation in persisting after everything else is destroyed. There's one of those mantras that says, well, how does it go? It ends up with, I still persist. Everything is destroyed. Let the soul look out upon a world destroyed, but I still persist. Let's see. I'll show you which one that is because, and probably have shown it to you before, but it's a wonderful place to go looking for mantras. Okay, so let the soul, okay, and I still persist. Okay, there's a few of them. And this is where it is. Let the forces come together, let them mount to the high place, and from that lofty eminence let the soul look out upon a world destroyed. Then let the word go forth, I still persist. But of course, this is the positive side of it. So look at all these 7 because they really have some mantras that are extremely useful in our evolution from Esoteric Psychology, Volume 2, and whatever page we may be on, roughly page 84. So look in there, and but the whole idea of just messing up the place and destroying everything, and the feeling of power that one gets, and of importance and of invincibility, all those nice first-rate things when one lays waste. But the question is, was it meant to be destroyed? And that's where real discernment has to come in. Master Moria said something like this, that the first-rate types are so destructive that always some second-rate type is assigned to him, so he will not over-destroy. You know, I'm taking it a little bit, you know, with my own words. Remember that Aristotle was for a while, of course, Aristotle's second and third ray, was for a while the teacher of Alexander the Great, one of the very pure first-rate types. Now, just to prove this politics and education, Alexander just about killed him, actually literally killed him almost one fine day, and I don't know whether Aristotle left or not, but the idea was to temper this elemental force in Alexander so that it could be more judicious. So judicious destruction, DK talks about this all the time, clearing the way for the second-rate type to come in and build. But not all people are so, on the first ray, so judicious. A little bit more, the glamour of isolation or aloneness or aloofness. The first-rate type monadically has the biggest difficulty cultivating love. The second-rate type has the difficulty cultivating ray 3 intelligence, and the third-ray monadic type, the greatest difficulty cultivating the sacrificial will. It goes around in a triangular kind of circle. So sometimes there's a reason to go into yourself and really make the decisions that have to be made and not be affected by others. And sometimes there's just fear of interaction and fear of the loss of power. Therefore, remain aloof, alone, and isolated. And finally, as we were talking with Frida, and we had that meditation just recently, the glamour of the superimposed will upon others and upon groups. And it gives you a great feeling to superimpose your will. You're more important, you're more powerful, you're more lovable, you're more enviable, you're more of everything when others just have to listen to you and even back out the door so they don't turn their back upon the king or the queen, So this is, again, robbing other people of their own will, and instead substituting your own and not caring about them at all and thinking they have not much to offer at all and you have everything to offer. And obviously, like all glamours, that gets in the way of the apprehension of reality. So I've run through those, and we're not going to go beyond the first rate tonight. Maybe in these days we'll just do one per program, but there's plenty to think about. Anybody want to say anything about yourself or what you recognize about the later ones that we just looked at, the last half of this list? Okay, so there's a couple of things. Okay, no, that looks like from before. That looks like from before. Yeah, that looks like from before. So but I'll keep this up here. And I'll keep this up here. Okay. Anybody want to say anything? We started with wide control, or the dry Groschen opera, as it says, threepenny opera. As a matter of fact, I once had the occasion to play the leading role of Mac the Knife in this opera. And, I hope it wasn't who I really am, but it was kind of interesting to play this part of Mackie Messer, which means Mackie and the knife. And it was the story about a gang lord, basically, and a guy who was respected because he was so dangerous if you crossed him. So I got to learn about that. And, but that is not so uncommon. That does exist. So that was, a long time ago, but I learned something. Okay, Antoinette. Okay. And yes, go ahead.
Hi, Michael. I was just mentioning the last mentioned, I found an experience in many of the church groups or religious groups as well.
Okay, let's see. I want to make sure I can really hear you, Antoinette. Michael, can you help me decipher? I'm a little hard of hearing. Can you help me decipher what Antoinette just said? I'm sorry, Antoinette. I'm just, there's an echo in the machine.
Not a problem.
Okay,
I've written it down. And
just say it again, and I will try to get it, but say it slowly, okay? Go ahead.
I say that in the last glamour of the superimposed will, I've experienced many of that in church and religious groups, the superimposed will or will upon others.
I believe that is correct. And, I believe I passed through the whole age of Pisces as a choir director. And I listened to hundreds and hundreds of sermons. And, of course, the preacher always tells you about what he can't do. But there's a regimentation that occurs. It certainly began with Catholicism, or maybe, the Byzantine approach. But by the time we got to Catholicism, DK gave the rays. First ray, soul. Third ray, manipulative personality. Sixth ray, orthodox mentality. Sixth ray, rigidly devoted astral body. Seventh ray, ritualistic, etheric physical body. So the Catholic Church, beginning with the 1 on the high level and descending to the 7, it has 1, 3, and 7, all of those. And there's the tendency to lay down the law, and you must obey. Now Luther, he really came along. He was first ray also, and he was a Scorpio, and he with a Leo ascendant. And he was obviously first ray, as DK said, and he rebelled against all that and set up a whole new movement where every man, every person had his or her own connection with God, and you didn't need the authority that said, this you shall do. You listen to me or you won't get to heaven, Pay me this indulgence or you won't get to heaven. Oh, your relative just died. Well, give me, your money and I will intercede and your relative will get to heaven. But there's all kinds of the power of the priesthood, if you know what I mean. It's not just limited to Catholicism. It's all over the place. Every time you try to get in the way of someone's own direct connection to divinity, you are superimposing your own will upon theirs and your own approach upon theirs, and you're basically, it's theft. You're robbing them, You're robbing them of the direct connection with the energy with which they need to correct. Now, there's still, well, this is dying out. I would say this is dying out. And if you look at, Uranus as the major ruler of the sign Aquarius. It's the planet of individualism, the planet of rebellion, the planet of one's own free will. And there's going to be a lot of this throwing to the side. You already find it. The authority, the rigid authority of the Bible, the rigid authority of those who want to hit you on the head with the Bible all the time, or any other Bible, whether it's the Quran or the New Testament or the Old Testament, those things are going to be fading out. So, yeah, that's a place where authority is exercised in a way which takes away the individuality and the possibility for growth of the people upon whom the authority is applied. Anything else, Antoinette? Are you okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Many church groups. Yeah. Now, what are your thoughts on JWS? What's JWS? Is it JWS? I'm not sure. Jews or something else? Jehovah's Witnesses. Oh, yes. Well, look, we still have a lot of six-ray souls running around. And some of them are making the transition into the wider ray. And some of them are just, they're behind in a way, and they're just sticking to the orthodox rigidity that they have been taught. And, if they give that up, they get lost. One of the great fears of the six-ray type is getting lost. If I believe in you, I'm found and I'm saved. But if I don't believe, I'm wandering in the forest of darkness and error, and I will be damned. So it is an earlier and more childlike approach to thought, and it involves the idée fixe. Now, DK discusses idée fixe or idée fixe, and if you combine the sixth ray with the fifth ray, whoa, you have people like Jerry Falwell and others and of that type coming out with what's called the inerrancy of the Bible, word for word. Okay, well, never mind that it's been translated in many, many different ways, and you can't really translate perfectly from the Aramaic and from the Greek and so forth. But they're so desperate to hang on to something that they can clutch and find that it is infallible, inerrant, without possible error in every respect. They can breathe a sigh of relief, and they know they won't get lost or damned or all that. And Jehovah's Witnesses has some, it has, I've had them at my door too, and sometimes I engage them in conversation. They usually get mad at me. But okay, usually I say, look, my belief system is really entirely different from yours, and I really have no time now, okay? So, I've learned that it's not possible to talk to somebody who is so deeply convinced of the rectitude of their position that all they can do is reassert it, and say you're wrong. What's the use? But there is a developmental stage where that seems to be happening. And as a result, we have to identify these people and find the best ways to counteract that kind of attitude. And one of the ways will be through science, when it begins to prove certain things that are in contrast with their assertions. When reincarnation is proven, what a revolution that's going to be. But first, survival will be proven, and the heaven worlds and the soul will be proven, and then reincarnation will be proven, and then there'll be a major revision. So that's my view on that. Right. Jehovah's Witnesses. Right. That's my view on that. Okay. Well, I think well, I didn't know whether we were going to get through two of them or just one of them. And when I say getting through, I mean, what is getting through? You know, it's just a kind of a brief examination of things, basically. But it's something. And I think we better stay with the particular quality which is in the air. Now, you know, I know that the glamour we're going to be working on today is a little different, but when you think about all of the horrible, assertive, and destructive and harmful things that arise out of the state of depression, basically that people just don't feel worth anything, and they feel deeply dissatisfied with themselves, and they look for something which will compensate for that. And sometimes those things are really horrible things. You know, we've just experienced, you know, I mean, who knows what the rays of some of these people have been. A lot of sixth ray, first ray, seventh ray, you know, you don't fit, you're different, we get rid of you. We've had these really, you know, horrific display of Mars in Gemini in the horoscope of the United States. And, you know, there's just a lot of killing going on because people want to serve in a devoted way what they find to be right, and some great authority figure talks about it, and they want to prove their devotion, or they just feel contemptuous of all the others and want to establish their power over them because they feel vulnerable. There's all kinds of motives involved, and an uneasy, unbalanced, interiorly inferior, at least perceived that way, psychological state is often the root cause of this. Okay, so if it's not, if there's not a problem anymore, anybody on the staff side want to speak? Okay. See, basically, we have to get beyond Kamamanis. Kamamanis is an expectable, predictable, but not a legitimate means of modern humanity thinking. We've got to be able to feel, we've got to be able to think, and the idea that you can't have feeling without thinking and thinking without feeling kind of complicates things and doesn't give a clear result. We have to be able to have that mind held steady in the light. And then maybe we can see what is real, and we can see through some of the things that have, you know, tortured humanity along the way, preventing it from seeing the truth. Okay, let's have our meditation. So, like I said, I just somehow felt, to a little change of pace, to look at one of the fundamental glamours. Fundamental. You know, it's like self-pity. Well, he talks about suspicion, ray 1, self-pity, you know, kind of depression, ray 2, and a manipulation, criticism, you know, a ray 3. I won't get into the other rays. They all have their variations of these things. So we'll just be quiet for a little bit and come together again, you know. what we really find is that in the silence there is the synthesis. So we certainly want us to come together in the unity, the oneness, eventually the synthesis, to do this work. And we'll use our protective formula. Believe me, we do need it when dealing with this realm. And the sign of the cross of divinity, and as we know, it's the long-armed cross in this particular case, and it involves the eyes. So imagine yourself tracing a protective light with this cross for yourself and for the group. As a soul, I work in light, and darkness cannot touch me. I take my stand within the light. I work, and from that point I never move. So that cross is there. And the Ajna Center is emphasized with its fifth ray quality and its ability to see clearly and to help create that beam. So we focus the light now, the dual light of matter. We draw it up, etheric, physical, onto the mental plane, and the light of mind itself on the lower mental plane, blending the vitality of the light of matter with the clear thinking of the mental plane. And then we search interiorly for the light of the soul, imagining it, let's say, centered above the head. And we bring it down to join the other two lights. So upon the mental plane, three lights are one. The vital light of matter, the light of reasoning and logic of the mental plane, and the light of the soul from the higher mental plane. Three lights are one. And we will say, followed by the sacred word, the light is one, and in that light shall we see light. This is the light that turns the darkness into day. Then we enter the formula, and as the words are said, the group members visualize a great searchlight opening up, the searchlight they have created, turning its light upon the astral plane, detecting this glamour, and also being ready to weaken it. Radiance are we and power. We stand forever with our hands stretched out, linking the heavens and the earth, the inner world of meaning and the subtle world of glamour. We reach into the light and bring it down to meet the need. We reach into the silent place and bring from thence the gift of understanding. Thus, with the light we work and turn the darkness into day. And we will utilize now the spiritual will, bringing it into relation with the beam, strengthening that beam so that it can detect the presence of glamours and help to dissipate them. And we say together, with power upon its beam, the light is focused on the goal. And that goal, we know, is at this point to help the weakening of the glamour of depression. Humanity is not yet in a state of joy, and joy is of the soul. It is the indication that the soul has been contacted and that a good, strong relation between the personality and the angel of the presence is existing. So we're not going to use the words of power, but first think about the world, humanity's state of mind, and the factor of what he does name as the glamour of depression. And what What has that done to the human way of responding psychologically? What has that done to humanity's life? Think about that for a moment. And maybe think of it in relation to the old saying that where there is no vision, the people perish. If you read the law of repulse on the sixth ray, you'll see how that depression descends, closing down the opening of the tunnel where the light was coming from, and but eventually throwing the individual back on his own resources, and he finds the way. So the three words of power as one word of power. The power of our united light prevents the appearance of the glamour of depression. The power of our united light negates the quality of the glamour of depression from affecting humanity. The power of our united light destroys the life behind this glamour of depression. now in our own way and with intensity of purpose. During the 5 minutes of silence, we will see the work proceeding. We'll work with the beam, helping to penetrate and dissipate and weaken in general these forces which surround the individual with the gray clouds, and the sunny sun of possibility is not allowed to come through. So we'll work in understanding and dissipating the power of depression and dissipating that glamour. This is a glamour which is foundational to unhappy, suffering humanity. And DK tells us that joy cometh in the morning, that joy is of the soul, and that one of the great keynotes of the Aquarian age will be the joy. But of course, we have to know who we are, the inner God, the immortal inner deity, to understand the source of the nature of that joy, involved as we are in a great universal creative project, again and yet again, more times than we can ever name, in the infinitude of successive universes, representing the greatest of all infinities, absolute infinity. So we'll come to that, and it will disappear, the clouds which prevent the radiant sun from being perceived symbolically. Let us then withdraw our beam and return the lights to where they originated. Although we do want to continually work with the triple light, the mind held steady in the light and vitalized by the light of matter. And we know some little bit has been done on behalf of the divine plan. We cannot, you know how it is in occultism, you cannot look for results. You cannot be dependent upon results to keep you cheered enough to continue the work. You have to simply know it's right and you continue. So let us sound the Om 3 times, mental, emotional, physical, affirming whatever to the good has been accomplished. And we persist. Next week, we'll just have to see, about the, I think we're pretty good, but we have to look at the full moon there in Leo, a very important one, the Sirius full moon, the Leo full moon. The time would be the day after the full moon, and we would be on the morning schedule. So I'll put that in, and if there are any changes, we will do our best to notify you. So we thank you for being present, meditating together, and following Master DK's instructions about how to dissipate glamour, how to contribute to the dissipation of that enemy of humanity which keeps us from understanding and seeing reality. We have to clarify the three planes, and right now particularly the astral plane we're working on, and clarifying Kama Manas, and then clarifying the mental plane later, the plane of illusion. Tomorrow, as I said, I'm traveling, but we'll do my best to be there with Tuija in the north, and we can hopefully reach you via broadcast for the Soul of Nations presentation, where we read from the book The Destiny of the Nations, and we practice being a responsible member of our national soul and contributing our abilities to the contribution of our national soul, raising the spiritual status of the soul of humanity. And we'll be in touch, okay? Thank you very much for your presence. And just sign off now. Bye-bye.